The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Hello and welcome to this week's show of Weighted Donuts. I should say this month's show of Weighted Donuts. We've missed a few episodes, but I'm happy to be here. My name is Wayne Unger, and today I have Dave Jordan. Dave is co-author of the book Fastball John, The Life and Times of John D'Acquisto, former Major League pitcher. And David is also a contributor to the Hardball Times. Welcome, David.
Hey, Wayne. Thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. So, whether you live in New York or Florida or anywhere, I would think if you're a baseball fan, the news of the weekend, and possibly even for a few days going forward, is the not yet, totally approved Giancarlo Stanton trade. A lot of stuff is kicked around. I know you've probably seen my opinion on it on Facebook, but what's your take on the whole thing?
Well, you know what? It's so funny. Definitely, if you're a Marlins or a Florida or New York baseball fan and a resident of those states, this is kind of the number one story of the weekend. I think that there's a narrative that few writers are talking about now. A lot of people are trying to say that Jeter's helping the Yankees, or the new president of the Marlins, Derek Jeter, is and former Yankee legend, is trying to help his old ball club in the Bronx. I think the real narrative here is talking about how Brian Cashman, the Yankees GM, has bailed out Jeter. He accepted what amounts to be a $265 million debt obligation to allow the Marlins to begin their breakdown and their rebuild. I mean, from what I can gather, Derek Jeter wants his Houston Astros moment and believes he possesses the baseball IQ to accomplish that. Jeter's doing everything he can to remake the franchise. He's already removed the team, and you referenced so much of this in your previous podcast with Ed Berliner, that he's already removed the team alumni in Perez and Dawson. And he's already removed team icons in Jack McKeon and Jeff Conine. And sure, I know he backtracked and made them nonsense offers that he was certain they would turn down. I mean, Jeff Conine, he had a fine career, and I'm sure he's in financially stable shape. He didn't need a $50,000 deal to hang out and wave to and be a greeter at the ballpark in Miami. And it was kind of an insult to his stature with the organization. And I think everybody knew he was going to decline that. And the most ironic thing about this is because so much of Derek Jeter is essentially in this generation's Mr. Yankee, and so much of what he's built up is built upon the history of that ball club. Any argument you have with a Yankee fan generally ends with them shouting 27 and walking off. So Jeter needed to recognize that importance, that he completely disrespected the history of his new franchise. But he doesn't care. He wants the Marlins in his image.
No, right, right on the mark, and a good take on, the conspiracy theorists. I personally, anytime I saw that, anytime I read it anywhere as a comment, I just, I found it to be utterly ridiculous. But, and I understand he wants his Houston Astros moment, but the Houston Astros did not have a ball player just entering their prime with a 10-year contract.
Yeah.
And so I used to, my former co-host used to always ask this question, not last year, but the year before, when the Angels were in last place in their division. And he would ask it almost every week to people. So he'd say, we've been asking this question, should the Angels trade Mike Trout?
Yeah.
And some people said yes, more people said no, and I was always absolutely no, with a very small caveat, and believe me, my answer to the yes was like a package, one that would never happen, and two, no team would, it would defeat the purpose of trading for Mike Trout. But my thing was, you don't trade Mike Trout. He was under contract for a few years. Yes, the Angels, the farm system was looking horrible. The team itself needed so many pieces. But in this day and age, while a one-year turnaround isn't really feasible, only in rare cases, and really more in cases where teams underperform in general, but 2-3 year turnarounds are certainly feasible, where you can see the team's going in the right direction. And then my thing was, like, you just don't trade Mike Trout, because in 2 years you can see the team going in the right direction. And sure enough, what did we see with the Angels this year? And they do have some pitches, coming back from surgery. They added Justin Upton. They have Andrelton Simmons. It's like it's not looking as bleak as it was 2 years ago. They still have no farm system, but it's and they just and then of course they just got Ohtani, who I'm gonna wait before I make a comment, before I make a statement about whether or not I think he's going to be an impact player. I'm not so sure. I kind of, it's funny. I was reading Keith Law's take on Ohtani, and and I was like, wow, like did he go into my brain? Because like here's a guy that pitched 25 innings last year. I don't think he ever pitched more than 140 innings in a year. So, you're expecting him to jump in and become your ace. Like, I think you're asking for trouble if you're pitching more than 160 innings next year. So.
I think I agree with that. I mean, I don't know what the mileage is. Just to backtrack for a second, my philosophy on these pitchers that are all having issues and Tommy John surgery situations were the ones who were pitching in travel since the age of 9 years old and pitching all year round. And I think that the less impact a prospect had on his arm throughout his youth and his teen years and his high school years and perhaps his college years determines whether or not it's a matter of whether you have so many pitches in your arm. And I go back to the most classic example of that is actually the co-author of my book, Fastball John. John D'Acquisto. He threw 233 innings at the age of 19 in A-ball. And then in A-ball again, he threw another 210 innings. And then in AAA, he threw 230 innings, combining AAA and the Giants. So he threw upwards of 700, 800 innings before he even touched the Major League mound. So his arm could be fresh. I agree with you to an extent that they should, kind of ease him into it. There haven't been so many pitchers or players who have come over from Japan and immediately made an impact, other than Ichiro. And he was a seasoned player by the time he got over here. Same with Hideki Matsui. Is he going to make an impact? At some point he could. Is he going to make one immediately? I don't know.
Nomo, I believe, is another pitcher that comes to mind that, but, and you know what, as a Yankee fan, it's the same thing, like, everybody says, well, Luis Severino, he'll be the ace next year. I look at the fact that he's never pitched more than about 155 innings in a year, and including the playoffs, he went to about 210 last year. And, I certainly, if you look at the numbers, you got to give credence to Tom Verducci's whole theory on that, and he documents it every year. Yeah. So you either see injury or drop off, which could be from dead arm, and who knows. So
yeah,
but
interesting that you bring up Nomo, because he had phenomenal. It was Rookie of the Year. He was fourth in the Cy Young when he first came in. He was 26. He was 4 years older than Ohtani. And what happened was he kind of fell off rather quickly. And he had a great time when he got in. Dice K, remember Dice K? He was another one who was great when he got in. And then it's just 2 or 3 years later, they kind of just, that things, 4 years later, he was going 4 and 5 with an ERA close to 5 with the Mets. And it took him a little time to kind of make it back. And it seems like Nomo only had his great success when he was with the Dodgers in Los Angeles on the West Coast. So who knows if Ohtani's taking something from that when he was saying he wants to at least begin his career on the West Coast.
It's possible. The Dodgers always had a great stadium for pitchers.
Oh God.
And the other thing is Nomo had that hesitation delivery. Mm-hmm. So you have to wonder if at some point hitters started to read him a little better.
Yep.
You just never know. You just never know. So there was another interesting point made by a friend of mine and sometimes guest on my show, Joe Casal. Okay. Yeah. And basically, and Joe is a former player agent, not with Major League Baseball, more with NFL and NHL, but he knows the business and basically, like, he said that, he's got a friend that was like in the running, or he was in, he was kicking the tires on purchasing the Marlins, and he's, his friends, and Major League Baseball said to him, like, well, Derek Jeter's got to be a partner. And one, he felt as though Derek Jeter wasn't bringing enough to the table. And two, once he had a chance to look at the Marlins books, he was like, no way. Like, they have been saddled. They're saddled with so much debt. It's, it's almost like MLB's version of Wall Street.
Yep.
So more will be revealed there. I can't wait for that book to come out in a few years. I think that will be interesting.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that Manfred is kind of on the hook here a little bit, the MLB commissioner. Jeter's his guy. And for this deal to go down, I mean, it's not going to be like, the fans of 70s baseball love talking about those crazy Charlie Finley deals when he tried to sell off Ida Blue to the Yankees and Joe Rudy and Raleigh Fingers to the Red Sox, and they were summarily rejected by the commissioner on the grounds of what's in the best interest for baseball. I'm not sure this deal is in the best interest of baseball. It's in the best interest of the Florida Marlins. And but, for the most part, I think that they're going to do everything they can to put Derek Jeter in a position to succeed. And I think at some point, getting back to the narrative of Jeter remaking this franchise in his ideal situation, he's going to do everything he can to strip it down, and then hope that him and Gary Denbo can draft properly and make really smart decisions in terms of the farm system and get them to a place where they can compete 3 years, 4 years down the road.
Yes, but you know what? It's again, but I don't think it. I don't even think it was in the best interest of the Marlins. I think there's, like I say, you know what? If you wanted to strip it down, trading D. Gordon, okay, trading Ozuna, trading Christian Yelich, all great young players. Yeah. To me, those are the guys to trade. Plus, the fact that they have no farm system, and they haven't. I was reading, they haven't signed an impact international free agent since Miguel Cabrera. They haven't spent any kind of significant money on an international free agent. And one other thing to take note, although I believe he would have been close to free agency, that franchise took a huge hit when they lost Jose Fernandez.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. That was a very tragic, avoidable event, and it's terribly, terribly sad, both for the organization and obviously the Fernandez family. It was very terrible.
And one other thing about Derek Jeter, I might be one of the very few Yankee fans that is not a fan. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not knocking what he did as a player. I felt, in the overall body of work and where he is, and how he is looked upon, I feel as though, he's a little overrated, but I'm not saying he was bad or he stunk, but I feel as though, one, he was a little overrated, but there were many other things to the pieces of Derek Jeter that, have left a bad taste in my mouth over the years. We can start with when ARod was traded, and he was quoted in a Sports Illustrated article that, he was comparing himself to Jeter, saying, well, it's different when you're batting first or second. You don't know the pressure. It's not like having the pressure of batting third and fourth. And Jeter shunned him. And I truly believe that affected the team for years, and affected ARod. Whereas you go back to the winter of 76, 77, and the Reggie Jackson interview in Sports Illustrated, where he said, I'm the straw that stirs the drink, and Thurman can only stir it bad.
Yeah.
Well, about a year and a half ago, I was listening to Diane Munson, Thurman's widow, answer a question about Thurman's relationship with Reggie and that particular incident, and she said Thurman was absolutely angry. And she said, but he got over it. He put it aside for the good of the team.
Yeah.
They became friends, and she said that Reggie Jackson actually flew with Thurman a week before Thurman's fatal crash.
Yes.
So, those are certain asides. And then, of course, the whole front thing, small stuff that has nothing to do with the field, but Bob Shepard, the longtime PA announcer for Yankee Stadium, after he passed away, Derek Jeter used his recording to be announced at the plate, but yet no ball player from that team, and they had a day off on the day of the funeral. I remember this clearly. Not one ball player, including Derek Jeter, showed up at the funeral. Actually, the only person from the Yankees to show up at that funeral was Brian Cashman.
Right.
So just little stuff. The way, I mean, you're in the New York area. You remember how he milked the 3,000 hit thing. Like every other minute on all the sports talk radio shows, Steiner Sports, Derek Jeter, limited edition, 3,000 hit. His last year, being in the number 2 order. Yes, I know Joe Girardi was the manager, and Joe Girardi, made out the lineup card, but you knew in a situation like that, he wasn't going to move Jeter out of the number 2 spot unless Derek Jeter came to him and said, hey, listen, you know what? Maybe we should move me down. Maybe I'm hurting the team where I am. Maybe we ought to try something else. And I can go on and on from other things that I'm familiar with, and some speculative, but some yes.
What's interesting? Let me just answer that. It's like I've been talking with certain athletes and doing first person things and these articles and whatnot. Sometimes athletes don't have the mental capability to look at a situation and say, you know what, maybe this should be done for the best of the team. When you have that singular focus for decades and decades, going through, competing at a high level in high school and then competing at a high level in the minor leagues or at college and whatnot, I don't know if you can really grasp the fact that, you know what, my time is done now and I need to do this for some athletes can, but if you have, you need a certain focus to be able to sustain the off the field and get away from the off the field distractions to put together a career like Jeter, and perhaps he just didn't have in his head to do that. I'm not apologizing for the guy, but I think at a certain point, he recognized it was his time to go, and he did that before the season began. But I don't know, it's really a tough conundrum sometimes. It's tough talking to athletes and saying, we need you here instead of the place that you've been for the last 20 years.
Well, But the thing is, Derek Jeter's his brand itself,
Yep.
okay, was built on being a selfless player.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why, that was the other reason why.
That's a good argument there, and it's like you could look at somebody like, say, Robin Yount, who was, the face of the Brewers infield from '74 till '83 or whatever, and then he realized, or somebody realized, hey, dude, you're going to need to go to the outfield, and he was on track for being a Hall of Fame player, and he took it in stride. You go back to your example of ARod's arrival. Maybe Derek should have moved to the outfield like Robin Yount did at that time. Maybe that could have helped the team a little better.
And
very good argument.
And another take on that is, the person who's perceived as selfish, that's the guy that moved to third base, and he definitely was the better defensive shortstop among the two.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
how long he would have stayed there, we don't know, but at that time he was clearly the better defensive shortstop.
Mhm. Yeah. You really can't argue that, especially when you look at the sabermetric numbers. They really don't help Jeter's cause very much. I think that for the most part, what ARod, I think a lot of New Yorkers still have this affection, and still do to this day, for Derek Jeter as a New York Yankee. And ARod, if anything, had needed to come in with a little more humility. And I think he's grown into that role. He's been fantastic on when we've seen him on Fox the last couple of years as a broadcaster, and he's really grown into that role. And
even in his last 2 years as a Yankee, the one successful year when he came back, when he had a successful year as a DH, and even when he bombed out and they ultimately, kind of made him an advisor. You could see the change, and I said this before. I'm a person, who went through recovery, and I tell people, I say, I look at Alex Rodriguez, I look at him as a recovering asshole, and I say this not so much for things that were written about him, but things that I listen to this guy talk, and I listen to interviews, and I think to myself, oh man, dude, shut up. Like, you didn't have to go that far. You didn't have to say this. You didn't have to say that. You would you would certainly pick out, the baseball, the brilliant mind of baseball, but, it was his narcissism was just so evident in, every time he opened up his mouth. And I tell people, I say, you know what? There's an old saying, like, find humility before humility finds you. And I think humility found him. And, with everything that he went through with his suspension and, and just finally, like, throwing up his hands. And so I say, if you had a family member who was an alcoholic and had, destroyed their life and was an alcoholic for years and turned everything to shit, and if they started, if they became sober and started to get their life together and you see it before your eyes, you'd give them another chance, wouldn't you? Well,
yeah, of course.
I mean, and that's how I perceived, and still perceive, Alex Rodriguez. Like, I think his whole, persona, like, from the inside out, I think, he's definitely, made a genuine change.
Yeah, and, you have to think about things. I've always kind of, like, examined his whole, the trajectory of his baseball life. I mean, he came to the Seattle Mariners 1994. He's 18 years old. I mean, he came in basically the same time Robin Yount, or at the same age Robin Yount came in. But for the most part, he really didn't have that much of a structure to his life, and he basically grew up under the tutelage of Scott Boras, and basically, I used to kind of call him the Manchurian shortstop, and it's because he was very much just this baseball robot, and he did everything that Boris had him do, and then after a while, when he was exposed to a New York audience on a large stage, he kind of recognized, hey, I got to change up a couple things, and you saw that when he got rid of Boris as his agent in 2007, and then when he went through all the issues with with the steroid claims and whatnot, and the suspension. I think you're absolutely right. Humility did find Alex Rodriguez, and he looks to be a completely different person. I mean, I know it's only a singular experience, and it's kind of like a small sample size personality test, but I remember I was with a couple of people, and we walked by and saw Alex Rodriguez coming down Park Avenue in New York, and every other person approached him, and just in the middle of the day, all he did was just say hi and thank you and hi and thank you. It must have been 15 people in 2 blocks who approached him, and all he did was smile and say thank you and hello and touch people's arms gently and whatnot. And he was, you could call it the politician's touch, but he really seemed like this genuine person. And in addition to how we see him, and there's this great clip on YouTube of ARod and Frank Thomas and Pete Rose, which so many of people have seen already, but it really just shows his love of baseball, his interest and grasp of the concept of baseball, and the warmth that he exudes to the other guys that he's with. And, either it's a Emmy-worthy performance, or this guy has some warmth to him now.
Right, and until he shows the old ARod, I mean, you know what? It's only fair that you give him the benefit of the doubt, like, we've given so many other people the benefit of the doubt in society, and people who have done much worse. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and
I think that you and I are getting at the beginning of that narrative, where I think more and more people are beginning to give ARod that benefit of the doubt, and I think you're really going to start to see a lot more people look differently at Jeter and what he's done over there.
Now, by the way, in that YouTube clip, is that the one where Pete Rose talks about hitting? How he just like moves up, down, back, forth?
Yeah.
Yes. That was it was priceless. Priceless, basic stuff. There's an old saying, if you don't forget the basics, you never have to go back to them. Mm-hmm. So, and one other thing, speaking of ARod, there was like a little bit of talk kicked around about, ARod, should be the next Yankee manager. What were your thoughts on that?
I think the next Yankee manager is Brian Cashman. You're seeing a kind of lessening of the importance of the role, and basically, if there was any need for a manager's tactical skill on the field, you probably are looking at Hensley Mullins in the dugout rather than Aaron Boone. I mean, basically, what the role demands at this point is somebody who's very good with the media, and we know Aaron Boone's been with ESPN, and he did a wonderful job in the broadcast booth. Plus, he knows everyone because basically he, for all intents and purposes, grew up in the business. His grandpa was Ray Boone, his father was Bob Boone, who's a manager himself. So he is going to. It's a funny thing. He kind of already has sort of a bench coach in the family in Bob Boone, and while Bob Boone wasn't necessarily the most successful manager, he does have the experience commensurate with the role. So Aaron Boone's going to have a lot of good voices in his ear to pull it off. Do I think he's the best choice? He wouldn't have been my choice, but I think that as you're seeing guys like Dusty Baker getting let go, and Terry Collins, for whatever you want to say, it's just a lot of these older school guys. They don't want guys with opinions. They want guys that can manage a clubhouse and leave the opinions to the analytics guys. And someone who has a baseline competence in bunting and what you would do in the middle of a game and whether you're going to bunt or don't bunt or anything like that, or the in-game tactics. As long as there's a baseline competence and more of a savvy with handling the ramifications of the media, I think that's what the role is now.
No, I agree. I tell you what, it's kind of likened to car sales. Now, I I actually sold cars back in the early 80s, and our sales manager, he was like a car sales guru. And I know you're thinking, all right, what does this have to do with baseball? But he actually had a school where, you know, dealers would send their salesmen for training. They would send them for updated training sales, you know. And he used to say, he said, one of these days you guys are going to get paid by the hour, because basically it's all going to be about computerized numbers, and, you know, it's like they're just going to, like, you know, how far down can they go for, on the margin. He, you know, he said there'll be no more making deals at the desk. You know, right. You guys will no longer make deals at the desk. He goes, it's all going to come into my office, so to speak. And, right. and that's pretty much what it has also become. So many people these days actually don't even walk into a dealership till they pick up their car. It's like they know what they want, and it's like as long as they get the number, okay, done deal. Yeah. But you know, it's funny talking about, like, I was never a fan of Joe Torre as a manager. You know, in the terms of tactical, and I've said this many times on the show. I said, if you notice, Joe Torre wasn't as good a manager when Don Mattingly became his bench coach. He was great when he had Don Zimmer and Willie Randolph, but you know, you know, you can see the difference in the way the club was managed, and I've been very vocal about this as well. I'm no fan of Don Mattingly as a manager, and I'm glad he didn't become the Yankee manager when they hired Joe Girardi, and I'm glad there was no thought whatsoever in, you know, possibly bringing him on as Yankee manager this time, because I just feel as though it would have been a disaster. It would have tarnished, you know, his aura as a Yankee.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see who they choose as, you know, whether Brian Cashman is going to make the choice or whether Aaron Boone is going to make the choice. I'm curious to see who his bench coach would be. I personally would love to see it be Willie Randolph, who I thought was an excellent tactical manager. Not perfect, but I thought he was very good.
Yeah, but he seemed to have issues with the media, and that's kind of what the job doesn't call for these days, unfortunately. And I do think that there's a certain ego aspect to this, where, you know, I think that, you know, I don't know what the conversation was. You know, just go to the Mets for a second, between Sandy Alderson and Wally Backman. If Wally Backman simply outright rejected any notion of using data and statistics to make his decisions. I mean, you can go back to 1983 when the Mets hired Davey Johnson. I mean, every other article cited this Big Apple computer in his office, or Commodore 64, whichever one it was. But a lot of his decisions were based on statistics. And but it was also, he was a fantastic players manager, and he got along with the players, and he was able to communicate with them. And I think you need something, not just gutty baseball instincts, which Wally Backman might possess, similar to what Billy Martin possessed. But in this day and age, you know, with the money that's being spent on these guys, there has to be some kind of analytical voice in there, and you know, you hope these guys are accepting of that.
And not to mention, think about with the media coverage. Not only with the media coverage, with the media itself, with everybody with a phone, with a camera, whether it be a still camera or a video camera in their hand, everywhere you go. Think about Billy Martin or a Billy Martin type under the microscope today.
Oh yeah.
It would be a public relations disaster. I can just see it, you know, like some incident, public outrage, I apologize and I'm stepping down. You know, that's probably what would have happened.
And you know, it's amazing with Billy Martin. from all of the incidents that were discovered, how many probably went down that weren't even discovered or were discovered but quickly taken care of, we shall say?
Yes. Yes. I mean, yeah. Think about, wow. I mean, I wonder, I wonder what would have happened today to Lenny Randall when he had his incident with Frank Lucchese, the manager of the Rangers. And Lenny is like, that's not Lenny. That was like just one incident. That's not Lenny.
You know what I think? I think that there would have been so many voices on Twitter on both sides of that, that a lot of people would have, especially with now to really, if you want to discuss it, the black and white issue, and there would have been more talk of what Lucchese had done to provoke Lenny Randall. And I think you would have definitely heard both sides of that, and it would have been debated ad nauseum on the Talking Head sports shows. No doubt about that. I actually think his suspension and what it was probably would have been less.
You know what? You might be right on that. That's an excellent point. So tell me something. You had a Hall of Fame ballot. Off the top of your head, can you rattle off some names?
For the Hall of Fame ballot, well, first of all, we got the modern era ballots coming tonight at 6 p.m. I would say that you're probably looking at my guess is probably going to be Jack Morris. If I had a vote, I would vote for probably Marvin Miller and Alan Trammell. And what's interesting is I think Alan Trammell right now is probably the one Hall of Famer among those not on the actual ballot who probably should be in there. I mean, his numbers are so close to Barry Larkin that he should definitely be a part of that. Do I think he's better than 8 or 9 of the guys that are on the ballot right now? I'm not so sure about that. The guys who I would be voting for right now, you're talking Vlad Guerrero, Chipper should be there. Lucina, Schilling, Tomei should be in. Edgar Martinez, Larry Walker is horribly underrepresented on the ballot. Barry Bonds and Clemens as well. And look, either we're going to take these guys off the ballot or we're going to keep them on the ballot. And if they're on the ballot, we should be able to spiritually vote for them. I'm talking about Barry Bonds. I'm talking about Roger Clemens, and I'm talking about Manny Ramirez, especially Manny Ramirez. He was such a special player. And he's completely being disregarded by so many voters at this point. So, I mean, those, and definitely if you're going in there to vote, you got to vote for 10 people. You can't just, do a protest vote and say, there was one guy who was a reporter for the Atlanta Braves, or for the AJC down there in Atlanta, and he only voted for the Joneses. He voted for Chipper and he voted for Andrew, and that's not right. And there was some guy in Cleveland who only voted for Tomei and Vizquel, and I mean, if you have a vote, you're allowed to vote, but I mean, there's a spirit of what you're doing, and you should really respect that spirit. There's at least 12 or 13 guys that are bona fide Hall of Fame players, and since you can only vote for 10, you should try to vote for 10. Those are my thoughts.
No, I agree, and unfortunately, the attitude that Clemens, Bonds, and Manning should be excluded, and guys didn't vote for Bagwell and Piazza for a while, and they obviously their minds had to be changed, and it was along the same lines, and you know what? All they did was muck it up. They mucked it up. Now there's a backlog. In other words, there are now deserving guys are not going to get in, and writers are actually. Some of them are not even voting for their 10 best guys. They're looking at like, you know what? I got this guy deserves to get in. I didn't vote for him. This is his last year. I have to vote for him. And then maybe somebody more deserving. I mean, now guys are actually managing their ballots based on how many years of eligibility somebody has. And all they did was muck it up. And it's ridiculous, the notion, because to me, it was pretty much a level playing field. I believe at least 75% and possibly even more were using some type of PED, some type of enhancement, and it's the same thing. Listen, not every player back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s was using greenies. Not all of them were using amphetamines, but we know a whole lot of them were. We know, and we're talking about Hall of Famers. Mickey Mantle, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, like these guys, they used amphetamines. They, I don't know actually overall the guise of how they were administered. But actually when you think about it, if they were, if there were two coffee pots and one was marked high octane, then guess what? Then, that it wasn't administered by a medical doctor and by prescription, per dose per person. I mean, it just, and who knows back in the earlier days, I'm talking about, in the early part of the century, the 20th century, where cocaine was legal. Opium, morphine was legal. Who knows who took advantage of things like that then? We don't know.
It seems like every era has had some kind of, societal or chemical advantage, whether it was back then they weren't playing against black pitchers, or there were amphetamines, or there was, there was steroids and PEDs in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. I mean, it seems like every era has had their thing. And it's just, you can't truly compare a player in 2017 versus one in 1917. But within that era, I mean, I think it's just either have them on the ballot or don't have them on the ballot. And if you have them on the ballot, people should be free to vote for them. And that's that.
And along those lines, what are your thoughts on Pete Rose, whether he should or should not be on the ballot?
Oh boy. You're talking about somebody that kind of idolized him growing up in the 70s, and I mean, you know what? It's like if you believe in the notion of parole, I mean, and then we're starting to get a little political here, but if you believe in the notion of parole, I mean, this guy's been ostracized for close to 27 years now, and I think that's a long prison term, and he hasn't been. If you go to Cooperstown every July for induction weekend, he's there. And, I don't feel bad for Pete one bit because he's there. He gets so much affection from the fans. There's a line out the door of the store where he signs. And he's there with the fans. He's interacting with the fans. And then when he wants to take a break, he and his wife, they take a walk to the restaurant that's right across the street. He'll run into Goose Gossage and I know he spends time with Morgan every year he goes there, and he sees other players, and they mix and they mingle. Okay, so he doesn't get his plaque in there. He doesn't get to go to the party at the Hall. But he might grab breakfast with a Mike Schmidt or something like that, or an Andre Dawson. But he does get the spiritual affection of the fans that every Hall of Famer enjoys when they go that weekend. And he doesn't get to go in the parade, but for the most part, and his life, and he still gets to have the life that he loves, and he loves the action and the craziness of Vegas. So he gets his Vegas life. If he doesn't get a 10 experience as a Hall of Famer on induction weekend, he gets a 7 experience, but he still gets an experience. I don't feel bad for Pete Rose, and should he be on the ballot? I don't know. I love him dearly from my past, and I can't reconcile that, but. I don't know if he should be on the ballot or not at this point.
Okay. I think he should, based on the fact that, like, let's face it, we have plenty of other sinners. Maybe not some that, who have violated, that sacred rule of baseball, but nonetheless, just on his playing career alone, and and Major League Baseball is very clear to say, they are a separate entity of the Baseball Hall of Fame. And so I think
they knew what the other was going to do in that instance. So I think that there was definitely some kind of spiritual coordination when Major League Baseball said, well, it's like going to a company and both partners want a guy to leave, and they'll say, well, talk to Jim. He's really in charge of it, when he knows what Jim's going to say.
Oh yeah, well that was originally. I think at this point now, I think I think Major League Baseball, again, I think they're like, no, we can't have them working in baseball, but I think Major League Baseball itself, I think they're resigned to, it's like, it's okay. I won't be mad, that kind of thing, it's like, like, a couple's getting divorced and, listen, so-and-so called me up and asked me to help them with this or asked me to help. Is it okay? I'm not getting in the middle of anything. I'm not taking sides. Is it okay if I help them out kind of thing, And, after a certain amount of time, the other part, initially that one party might not be comfortable with it, but after a certain amount of time, it's like, whatever, like that's, so.
Right. Do I think it's going to be a situation where he passes on at a certain point and like 2 years later they say, you know what, he can be part of the modern era ballot or whatever it is? I do think that's what's going to happen. I think within 30 years, there will be a Pete Rose plaque in the Hall of Fame. It'll be once he passes away, which I think is kind of a lousy way to do things, but I think their punishment is you just don't get to enjoy it. And I don't think it's that big of a deal because I think Pete Rose gets to enjoy it quite a bit in life right now.
Right. Okay. Well, David, I really appreciate you coming on.
No problem. This is fun. I enjoyed every minute of it.
That's good. But so listen, everybody out there, David is co-author of a book called Fastball John. So and it has gotten rave reviews. I myself have only read some excerpts of it, which I enjoyed. Unfortunately, I'm the kind of person who, I do things in spurts, and I just don't have time to read a lot of books. But, if you're trying to think of something different to get a baseball fan a gift for the holidays, Amazon.com, Fastball John. You'll find it. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about before we go?
That's about it. I'm contributing to the Hardball Times. Been doing some work recently on certain aspects of the game, and that's really about it. This is just a wonderful afternoon conversation with you, Wayne.
Oh, I agree. The feeling's mutual, and I thank you for being on. And everybody, I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope to be back on schedule, and we'll be back next week. So have a good week, everybody.